Moving on to markets now, and on Wednesday I was joined by Jeff Peterson of Heartland Farm Partners. He offered his take on next week's WASDE report and the market reaction to Hurricane Dorian. But he also says there's a lot to be optimistic about with this year's crop.
You know what, actually for Nebraska is looking really good. I'd say overall, we got off to a good start in a lot of areas. There's some problems up in northeast Nebraska, got a little bit slower, been a little bit drier. I think the best way we'd sum it up is that we're gonna have, I think, a little bit below average bean crop, unfortunately. I think the corn crop is probably gonna be average to a little bit above average. I think the dry land's probably gonna be better than what the irrigated is, I think in some cases, not meaning yield-wise, but just of the potential. So that's what we're seeing, but there's a lot of other states that are very jealous of Nebraska right now.
That's for sure, and you've had a chance to look at the latest Crop Progress report. What are some of your big takeaways there?
Big takeaway is actually just the stage of this corn crop. And the one statistic that stood out that was really surprising is really where the crop is at in regard to the percent dough. There's 17 million acres, over 17 million acres that are not at the dough stage yet. And normally that'd only be about 6.3 million acres. And what's kind of interesting about that, and so let's put this in perspective, it really, for some of that crop, it's going to take, when you're at the dough stage, about 35 days to get to black layer. And black layer is just where we're really kind of safe from the freeze. The other part about that is that even at the dough stage, if we did have a freeze at that point, our yield could be impacted by about 50%. So we're watching that really close. The other thing that we're looking at really close, so Troy, is also the dent stage. The numbers would show that nationally about 41% dented. Now put that in perspective, 5-year average is 63%, and we go all the way back and look at last year and we were way ahead at 73%. That's going to be the 5th slowest as we look back in our records. Now Nebraska's doing a little better. We're at about 54% dent. That compares to the 5-year average of 66%. Last year we were off to a fast pace, and that was 70% dented last year. But believe it or not, Nebraska's doing a little better there. We're about the 14th slowest is where we're kind of sitting right now. So not as bad as what it is nationally.
And Jeff, weather always a big story. We've got our eyes on Hurricane Dorian. So as we record this, it's off the eastern coast of Florida, already torn through the Bahamas. So has this storm had any impacts on the markets, and what do you think future impacts could be? Yeah,
and it definitely, it's very important. I mean, and I really, my heart goes out to any of those that have been impacted by this. And, you know, in the path, we've got agriculture coming through, you know, we've got corn and bean production in Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, and we went in and took a look at how many bushels of production for corn and beans are kind of in the path. And how we kind of find that is that we said, if the area is going to get over 3 inches of rain with some heavier winds, you know, that could have an impact, it could hurt it. So on the bean side, we estimate there's about 33 million bushels in its path and an area to be impacted. Over on the corn side, it's about 103 million bushels. Now those are some big numbers, and it's really going to be bad if it happens to be your farm or your field that get hits, but unfortunately it's not enough bushels of production to go ahead and cause us to see a change in the market direction.
And then next week, WASDE report. What are some things you're watching for with this latest report?
Yeah, you know, we're keeping a very close eye on the acre side. We think there could be some slight adjustments on the acres, in particular the corn, maybe something from the adjustment and on the harvested acre side. We think that could come in. And the other big thing that we're really watching though is the yield. And something I want to kind of unpack on the yield side is just kind of how the methodology is going to be different in the September report. And in the September report, we'll actually have the objective yield studies. Now last year, between corn, beans, wheat, and cotton, there'd have been, keep in mind, about 4,544 actual plots that they go out in the field and they set those up. That was something that we didn't have in the August report. And that's going to be important because what we're finding is that the crop probably looks pretty good from the road, but as you get in there, it probably doesn't look as good. And so as they get in those fields and they decide where they're going to set up their plot, and that's all random and they've got it set up ahead of time, they're then going to go in and actually do the stand counts. And then they're going to look at the ears. They're going to shuck them back, and depending on how far along they are, they'll look at the rows around, they'll look at the length, and if they're far enough along, if they're all the way to black layer, which there won't be many of those, then they'll physically take those all the way back into the lab and they'll weigh them. Otherwise, they'll just have to kind of estimate what the weight of those ears are. But what's really impressive about what they do on the objective yield side is they'll come back to that same plot, and they'll come back to it again and look at it until actually the harvest is done. And then they'll actually look at, even after it's been harvested, they'll then go out and they'll look at, okay, how much harvest loss was there in the area where the farmer actually combined? So they try to do a really thorough job of getting us a yield, and I think we need those yield numbers, because I think what we've got right now nationally is that the corn yield's too high, and I think in future reports we're going to see that number come down.